Hello everyone. Over the years, I've accumulated many assets from the Unity Asset Store, but I've never really used any of them. There are many controllers on the platform, so I thought it would be cool to see which could help make a game the best. Welcome to MAG. Game Creator 2 was the first controller I chose for this series. Before I began, I started by making a super simple design doc that was basically a checklist of what I needed in the game. What I wanted in the game, aka out of scope, and pretty much just what was mandatory to make it in the week deadline. Did I mention I'm doing this in a week? Well, a week is the time limit, and I spent the first on the dock. This overview is crucial for the overall outcome of the game because it will be my guiding light. I decided to make something akin to an adventure game, but something that isn't too extensive. I've recently been watching some of From Software's older titles like Eternal Ring to get an idea of how to capture the feeling of a world without much dialogue. No, not that ring. This one. Despite wanting to make a grand adventure, it will have to be a bite-sized portion for this project. I sifted through my assets to find some that could work for me for now, and I have a nice amount of low poly stuff, so that would determine the aesthetic. After getting Game Creator 2 in the project, it's time to go to work. The second day, I dedicated time to the player and the basic enemies of the game. GC2 makes this process simple, as all you need to do is make a couple clicks and your character is there. I got this nice ass low poly asset that has a plethora of different classes I could make the player, but to keep things low stress, I choose the warrior. After a bit of tweaking, I added it to the GC2 player model, and I know aesthetic things should be done last, but it's so simple that I figured I'd knock it out early, at least for the players. I then start to work on the player's basic attacks. For these, I used the Human Melee Animations pack, which didn't have as much as I thought I would be able to use, but it'll do. The Melee module of Game Creator 2 makes creating attacks pretty easy with little to no hassle. But there is still setup to be done around it, like the attack collision. None of it is difficult though, and before long, I'm able to get a prototype of the player attacking. I also added some locomotion animations from the same asset pack to make it more lively. The world is a bit lonely, so I added a skeleton from this biped creatures pack from the same people that made that pack with the warrior. I followed similar steps to get the attacks and locomotion down, and now the enemy is finished. Well, kinda. The skeleton has systems in place, but nothing to tell it to execute them. That's where Game Creator 2's behavior asset comes into play. There are 4 different ways to set up your AI with this asset, but I'll be using a behavior tree. Nothing too major will go into making these guys tick, so they'll have a simple instruction to follow the player and attack when they're close enough. When adding the attacks, I also made sure to add hit reactions so the player has feedback on damaging the enemy as well as being damaged. Speaking of damage, we need a way to kill each other, so I'll be adding yet another asset into the mix, the stats module. I'll speak more on the module system GC2 abides by later, but for now, let's drop some bodies. Now that the first basic enemy is set, I go into the behavior system on day 3. Killing enemies could be done in a couple ways, but I'm opting to use the behavior tree. Above all else, the enemy will prioritize dying when their HP reaches 0. You know, video game shit. I also add an extra pause on the attacking so the skelly isn't bombarding the player with slashes. For the most part, the enemies are close to finished with a couple tweaks being needed here and there, so I'll go ahead and move to the environment. There's this scene from this low poly village pack that I use for starters because I'm unsure if I can finish an actual full-fledged area in the allotted time, so this will do. After a look around the environment, I move on to our second baddie, the mage. Like I mentioned, the behavior for the enemies is mostly done, and that's because I'll be reusing the behavior of the first guy. Instead of swinging a sword, our mage will be maging, aka throwing fireballs, so the sword swipe gets replaced with a projectile, and this was giving me the blues. With the GC2 triggers and actions, there really isn't too much to be done with moving objects unless done in specific ways. One of the best ways I found was using what's called a marker and setting it on the player, and the fireball flies to this marker to damage the player. I also had to set collision and stats properties on the fireball to actually hit and hurt the player. After that hiccup though, I was ready to move on to the leveling system. Day 4 wasn't too much of a hassle, and I really started to feel like this was all coming together, albeit super simple. Now that the enemies can die, I want them to give the player XP so you have a good reason to kill them. Game Creator does a good job at providing examples that can easily be implemented into your game, and leveling is one of them. I make sure to swap out the property stats and such around and add UI elements, and bam, you can level up now. With the ability to get stronger, I thought it would be a good time to add in the big bad, the Golem boss. Defeating this guy would be the game's win condition. He also is a derivative of the first enemy, but with a larger health pool. I was trying really hard not to stretch things too far and have an unfinished game, so everything is simple, but playable. To be honest, the core game seems complete, but I wanted more fun factors in the game. I circled back to the fodder enemies, and I wanted them to drop something for the player. I decided it would be coins, since it's a universal scoring system, but I also wanted the player to do something with them. So I started the currency journey with some inconveniences. At one point, I was spawning skeletons after killing a skeleton like a fucking plasma in DMC1. I wonder if that's how they came to be. Anyway, I want the coins to be physical and attract to the player when they appeared, but this is damn near purely cosmetic, and I decided to go with a Souls-like approach where the currency is just given to you, regardless of the location of the enemy's death. Day 5 was approaching, and I started to feel the pressure. I thought I had this all in the bag, but many small details still needed to be added, as well as editing this video, but I don't let that sway me and keep pushing. With the coins in place, I figured I would finally add a shop to the environment, even though I put this as an out-of-scope addition. Of course, this was a bad idea, and I spent a needlessly long amount of time tinkering with the merchant until everything was in a working order. Yeah, should've left this one out, but we don't dwell and keep moving. I now let the player block attacks so it doesn't seem too overwhelming to deal with damage. I was gonna add a tutorial, which I should have done instead of the shop, but I put the basic controls on the side of the HUD to always be displayed. I've seen a few games do this, and even though I personally don't like the look, it'll do. I was doing so much testing of the play mechanics that I didn't put dying in yet, so that was the next step. I just added a black box to fade in when you die, which you are then put back into the village and healed before the screen fades back in. Nothing too crazy. Day 6 rolls around and everything is just about done. Then I listened to my game and heard nothing. So I quickly added some royalty-free sounds for some of the basics like the attack and being damaged. I also made a track for the game, and even though I don't like it too much, it at least kind of fits the forest setting. Now that everything is in order, I look at the primary checklist to make sure I have everything, and I think it's time to build. This part is optional, but I wanted to get the feel of exporting projects. I'm down to the wire now, and it's about time to put together the video itself, a victory lap of sorts. I record some things, and along with the recordings I made along the way, I am essentially done. The final day is here, and I took some time to check some things before posting the video, and yeah, of course there were issues. I checked the game again, and for whatever reason, the inventory would open in Unity, but not in the final build. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why this was an issue, and I didn't have enough time to make the big fix, so this would just have to go down as an L. On the bright side, the inventory was only tied to a single item you could purchase, which if you remember, the shop was out of scope of this project anyway, so I feel a bit better about that. At this point, I think it's time to go a bit further than making a build. I also decided to post the game on itch.io for anyone to try regardless of how minimal it is. I can honestly say that this was a fun video to make, and seeing the vision come together was a moment of satisfaction I want every dev to experience at least once. Now let me yap about the Unity stuff for a bit. As you remember, the controller I used for this video was the Game Creator 2 asset, but there's more to this asset than a single load. You see, with GC2, there are multiple modules that need to be purchased separately in order to work more fluidly with a specific function. For example, you can make melee attacks without the melee module, but the asset makes creating attacks more streamlined and it's easy to understand. Even without the other modules, GC2 allows for you to make custom triggers and such that are integrated into the asset ecosystem. There are many additional assets on the store that are made for Game Creator 2 doing just this. Even with the purchase of the other modules, there aren't many examples of anything too intermediate. Let's use the melee module again. There's an example for takedowns, which is cool, but what if I wanted the takedown to be more akin to a critical hit from breaking poise? This is a simple example, but you would need to do a lot of your own work finding out how to incorporate a system like that. I suppose that's where the custom triggers come into play, but I can't expect everyone to be able to create these. I forgot to mention that this asset uses visual scripting, so if coding is where you're more comfortable with, this asset may not be for you. That's it for today. Let me know how you feel about the end result. Do you think I could have did better? Do you think going 3D was a bit overboard? Let me know below. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. It not only helps me with YouTube, but also lets me know if you like this content. You can also check out my Patreon for the game too. The links will be in the description. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Saggy, and I'm also out.